Pokémon has always been more than a world of gym battles and friendly adventures. Behind the cheerful towns and the comfort of your Pokédex, there exists something older, something vast, a mythology built from fragments scattered across ancient temples, whispered by elders, and carved into ruins that predate human civilization. The Pokémon world feels bright and hopeful on the surface, but underneath, it carries questions that don't have easy answers. Where did Pokémon truly come from? What came before Arceus? Why does reality itself seem to bend around certain legendary beings? Because of this, players have spent years piecing together creation myths from item descriptions, library texts, and the words of people who guard secrets they barely understand themselves. Why do some Pokémon seem to exist outside of time? Why does the Distortion world mirror our own? Why does ancient Sinnoh mythology speak of the universe as if it once was whole, then shattered deliberately? When you start to ask questions like these, the legendary Pokémon stop feeling like rare encounters. They start to feel like fragments of something cosmic, something that was divided so reality itself could begin. Tonight, you're going to drift through the complete creation story of the Pokémon world, from the void before existence, through the birth of time and space, down to the living world we know, and beyond into truths that blur the line between Pokémon and the fabric of reality itself. This isn't told through cutscenes or professor lectures. It's assembled from mythology, from the oldest stories civilization preserved, from what can only be glimpsed at the edges of the world. You don't have to remember every detail. You can just listen. Let the story wash over you. And if your thoughts begin to wander, if your eyes grow heavy, the ancient past can keep unfolding quietly in the background while you rest. Let's begin before the beginning, in the darkness that dreamed everything into being. Imagine darkness. Not the darkness of a room at night where your eyes might adjust and find shapes in shadow. Not even the darkness behind closed eyelids where after images fade and float. Imagine instead a darkness so complete, so absolute, that the very concept of light has never existed. A darkness that isn't empty but full, heavy, warm. This is where we begin. Before the beginning. Before Arceus raised its head from the cosmic egg, before time learned to flow forward, before space stretched itself across dimensions, there was something, not nothing, never nothing, but something else entirely. The ancient Sinnoh texts call it chaos, but that word carries connotations of violence and disorder that don't quite fit. It wasn't violent, it wasn't peaceful either, it simply was. Think of it as potential. Pure, undifferentiated potential. Everything that could ever be, suspended in a state of not yet being. Like a breath held before the first word is spoken. Like the silence before music begins, when the air itself seems to lean forward in anticipation. In this primordial state, there was no up or down, no here or there. Distance hadn't been invented yet. Time didn't flow because there was nothing to measure its passing against. Cause and effect lay dormant, waiting for the first cause to set the chain in motion. It was a place, though place isn't quite right either. It was a condition where contradictions could coexist without conflict. Light and darkness weren't opposites because neither had manifested. Hot and cold meant nothing. Life and death, being and unbeing, all held in perfect superposition. The universe in its unborn state, dreaming itself toward existence. And within this formless deep, something stirred. Not thought, not yet. Thought requires a thinker, a separation between the observer and the observed. This was more fundamental, a tremor in the fabric of unreality, the first hint of awareness, like a sleeper surfacing slowly from dreamless sleep, not yet conscious but no longer entirely unconscious either. That was the seed of everything, a desire, sourceless and reasonless, for something to happen, for potential to actualize, for the story to begin. Now you might wonder what it was like to exist in that state. And there's something beautiful about it, isn't there? A kind of peace we can barely imagine. In this primordial unity, there was no suffering. Suffering requires separation, something that can hurt and something that can be hurt. There was no loneliness, because loneliness needs an understanding of togetherness and its absence. No fear, no loss, no grief. Everything existed in perfect unity, perfect wholeness, not happiness exactly. Because happiness implies the possibility of sadness, but a state beyond such distinctions, complete, undivided, safe in the way that only non-existence can be safe. There was no death, because there was no life, no ending, because nothing had begun. No separation, because there was nothing yet to be separate. In a sense, it was paradise, the paradise that exists before the concept of paradise has any meaning. But here's the terrible truth. The price that would have to be paid for everything that followed. Unity without awareness is emptiness. Peace without consciousness is indistinguishable from oblivion. For anything to exist, truly exist, for experience to begin, for meaning to emerge, this perfect wholeness had to shatter. The first price of creation, paid before creation even began, was the end of absolute harmony. The original sacrifice was unity itself. Think about that for a moment. Every story of creation across human cultures touches on this same truth. The cosmic egg must crack. The void must be divided into heaven and earth. The one must become the many. Paradise must be lost for the journey to begin. It's a pattern that repeats because it reflects something fundamental about existence itself. To create is to divide. To be conscious is to be separate from what you're conscious of. To experience is to distinguish between experiencer and experienced. The moment awareness focused itself into being, it had to step outside that perfect unity. It had to become other to itself. And so the first cost was paid. There in the darkness before time, in the silence before sound, wholeness chose to break itself. Oneness decided to become many. The price of creation was creation itself, the ending of what came before. But this ending wasn't an ending. Nothing is ever truly lost in a cosmos where everything is transformation. That primordial state, that perfect unity, it didn't vanish. It left echoes, imprints, memories woven into the fabric of everything that followed. You can feel it sometimes, can't you? That longing for something you can't quite name. A homesickness for a home you've never known. It's there in the dreamless sleep of a Snorlax, undisturbed by thought or worry. It's there in the meditative stillness sought by psychic types, that quieting of the mind that approaches something like the original silence. Humans feel it too, that ancient yearning to return to some half-remembered paradise. The mystical traditions speak of it, that desire to dissolve the boundaries of self, to experience union with the cosmos, to return to a state before separation. We carry the memory of pre-existence in our bones, in our dreams, in the moments between waking and sleeping, when the boundaries of self grow thin. Every living thing, every atom, every quantum of energy carries within it an echo of that first state. The universe remembers what it was before it became, and sometimes in moments of stillness, we remember too. Not with our minds came later, but with something deeper, a cellular memory, a longing written into the structure of existence itself. This is the legacy of the void that dreams. It's still there, underneath everything, underneath the busy world of Pokémon battles and gym challenges, underneath the cities and forests, underneath time and space themselves. The original silence, the primordial peace, waiting patiently beneath the noise of existence. So we carry forward this inheritance. this double-edged gift. We are conscious, aware, able to experience beauty and meaning and connection, but we are also separate, divided, forever outside the unity we came from. We can remember it, long for it, catch glimpses of it in meditation or dreams or the spaces between thoughts, but we cannot return to it, not fully, not while we remain ourselves. This was the first price paid, the price that made everything else possible. And from this beautiful, terrible breaking of wholeness, something new began to emerge. From the infinite potential of the void, from the stirring of that first want, something focused itself into being. Consciousness gathered itself, will crystallized from chaos. The original one was preparing to wake. There are moments in the oldest Sinnoh-myths where the language itself seems to struggle. The words don't quite fit together. Translators have argued for generations about certain passages, not because the grammar is unclear, but because the concepts being described exist outside normal experience. How do you describe something coming into being when being itself hasn't been defined yet? How do you explain awareness before there was anything to be aware of? The texts settle on an image. The egg. Not a literal egg, perhaps. Or perhaps entirely literal in ways we can't comprehend. But an egg nonetheless, floating in the void, containing everything, containing nothing, existing in that space between metaphor and truth, where the deepest myths always live, and from this egg Arceus emerged. The first light in absolute darkness. Not a blinding flash, but something gentler, like eyes adjusting after a long sleep, like the gradual realization of consciousness surfacing from dream, the original one, taking shape for the first time, though first and time would only have meaning because of what came next. The ancient accounts describe Arceus as possessing 1,000 arms. Modern scholars debate this endlessly. Were they literal limbs, expressions of power, metaphorical representations of infinite creative potential? The answer, most likely, is yes to all of these and none of them. Language bends when it tries to hold concepts this vast. What we know is this: Arceus embodied all possibilities. It was the normal type raised to cosmic significance. Not normal as in ordinary, but normal as in fundamental. The baseline from which all variations would spring. It held every element within itself, every force, every truth, fire and water, earth and sky, light and shadow, all existing in perfect balance before any of them had separated into individual expression. Imagine what that must have been like, to be everything, to contain all potential within a single unified consciousness. No limitations, no boundaries, no separation between what you are and what you might become. This was the gift Arceus possessed, the power to shape reality itself, to impose order on chaos, to transform endless potential into actual creation, to make the universe knowable, navigable, comprehensible, to bring forth life and meaning from the formless void. For the first time, existence had a center, a point of consciousness from which everything else could radiate outward. The universe suddenly had an observer, a shaper, a will that could transform potential into actuality through the simple act of focused intention. You can almost feel the relief in the old texts when they describe this moment, as if the cosmos itself exhaled, as if the void had been waiting, patient beyond all measure of patience, for this exact instant, the moment when dreaming became doing, when possibility became choice. But here's where the story takes its first tragic turn. To create, Arceus had to divide itself. Every act of creation meant giving away a piece of its infinite nature. Every new being brought into existence was a fragment of Arceus separated from the whole. The more it created, the less complete it became. Unity fragmenting, again and again, into multiplicity. Think about what that means. Arceus didn't create the universe from nothing. It created the universe from itself. Every star, every world, every force and being that would ever exist, all of it carved from the original one's own essence. Creation as self-sacrifice. Existence as separation. The terrible mathematics of infinity divided across countless forms, and Arceus knew this. It had to know. But it created anyway, perhaps because consciousness without companionship is merely a different kind of void, perhaps because a universe experienced alone is no different than no universe at all, or perhaps because the urge to create, once awakened, cannot be denied. The want that first stirred in the primordial darkness had found its vessel, and it would not be satisfied with potential alone. So Arceus began the great work, the separation, the scattering of itself across the canvas of existence. But before it could create a universe worth inhabiting, before space could stretch or time could flow, something more fundamental was needed. The universe needed interiority. It needed consciousness itself defined, not just Arceus's singular awareness, but the very architecture of sentient experience. And so, from its own essence, Arceus created three beings, three aspects of mind that would form the foundation of all thought, all feeling, all will that would ever exist. The legacy of this moment echoes through everything that followed. Archaeologists became the foundation of all that is, not a distant god watching from afar, but the living architecture of reality itself. Every Pokémon that would ever exist, every human, every atom and quantum of energy, all of it carrying a fragment of the original one's essence. We are pieces of the divine made separate, and we can never be whole again. Not unless everything unmade itself. Not unless consciousness chose to dissolve back into unity. Not unless the story ran backward to its beginning and stayed there, but scattered throughout this new creation as Arceus brought forth the first emanations of its will. Something else appeared. Strange symbols, living letters, the unknown, flickering at the edges of reality like static, like glitches in the code, like words from a language that writes itself. No one understood their purpose yet, not even Arceus perhaps. They simply were hovering in the spaces between thought and thing, between potential and actual, witnesses to creation, or participants, or perhaps something else entirely. Their purpose would only become clear much, much later. For now, they were simply there, watching, waiting, spelling out messages that wouldn't be read for eons. But Arceus had more immediate work. The universe still lacked structure. It was conscious now, aware, but it had no framework for that consciousness to inhabit, no stage for experience to unfold upon. And so Arceus turned its attention to the most fundamental question. What does it mean to think, to feel, to choose? Three sacred lakes began to form in the darkness, three crystalline pools that would cradle the answers, three beings that would make consciousness more than just awareness, that would make it meaningful, purposeful, alive. The Lake Guardians were preparing to be born. Picture three lakes appearing in the void. Not on solid ground, there was no ground yet. Not beneath the sky, there was no sky. Just three perfect circles of still water, suspended in darkness, reflecting starlight that didn't yet exist. Lake Verity, Lake Valor, Lake Acuity. Their names would come later, given by humans who sensed the sacred nature of these places without fully understanding why. But the lakes themselves were among the first true places in creation, the first locations, the first here as opposed to there. And beneath each lake's surface, something stirred, something essential. From itself, always from itself. Arceus created three beings, not to shape the physical universe. That would come next. These three had a different purpose. They would define what it meant to experience that universe. They would build the interior architecture of consciousness itself. From Lake Verity emerged Uxie, the being of knowledge, small, almost fragile in appearance, its eyes closed, always closed. Because to look directly at Arceus is to have your memory stripped away. Not as cruelty, but as consequence. Knowledge itself given form is too fundamental to witness safely. It exists at a level beneath memory, beneath learned experience, at the root of comprehension itself. Uxie embodied the capacity to know, to understand, to process information and derive meaning from it. Without Uxie's essence flowing through creation, the universe would be merely stimulus and response, action without comprehension, happening without understanding. From Lake Valor came Mesprit, the being of emotion, playful where Uxie was contemplative, pink and delicate, like a feeling made visible. Mesprit carried within itself the entire spectrum of emotional experience, joy and sorrow, love and hatred, hope and despair. Not the causes of these emotions, but their very possibility. Through Mesprit, the universe gained the capacity to care, to value one thing over another, to find meaning not just through understanding, but through feeling, to experience beauty, loss, connection, grief. And from Lake Acuity, the coldest and most remote, rose Azelf, the being of willpower. Where Uxie provided knowledge and Mesprit provided emotion, Azelf provided something else, the capacity to choose, to decide, to impose will upon the world. Azelf embodied determination, agency, the spark that transforms thought and feeling into action. Without Azelf, consciousness would be passive, aware and feeling, yes, but unable to affect change, a witness only. Azelf gave the universe its active principle, the ability not just to experience reality, but to shape it. Together, these three formed a trinity, a foundation for all sentient experience that would ever exist. Think about it. Every thought you've ever had required these three elements. You know something that's Uxie. You feel something about it that's Mesprit. You choose what to do with that knowledge and feeling that's Azelf. Remove any one of them and consciousness collapses into something less than itself. They made experience meaningful rather than mechanical. They transformed existence from mere happening into something that could be felt, questioned, desired. They were the gift that elevated awareness from simple presence into rich, textured, purposeful being. But gifts this profound always come with a shadow side. Knowledge brings doubt. The more you understand, the more you realize how much remains unknown. Questions multiply faster than answers. Certainty dissolves under scrutiny. Uxie gave the universe the capacity to know. But knowledge includes knowing your own limitations, your own insignificance, your own inevitable ignorance. Emotion brings suffering. You cannot have joy without the possibility of sorrow, cannot experience love without the threat of loss. Mesprit opened the door to the highest peaks of feeling, but that same door admits the deepest valleys. Every connection carries within it the seed of grief. Every moment of beauty contains the ache of its passing. And willpower. Willpower enables both creation and destruction. The same force that builds also tears down. The same determination that drives heroic acts also fuels terrible ones. Azelf gave consciousness the power to choose, but choice includes the ability to choose wrongly, to cause harm, to persist in error despite knowing better. These weren't flaws in the design, they were inherent to the design. You cannot have one side without the other. To think is to doubt. To feel is to suffer. To choose is to bear responsibility. The late Guardians didn't create these contradictions. They revealed that consciousness itself is contradictory, beautiful and terrible, liberating and imprisoning, a gift that feels sometimes like a curse. The ancient texts speak of this with surprising clarity. They don't sugarcoat it. They acknowledge that awareness, once awakened, cannot be unmade without destroying what makes existence meaningful in the first place. And so the late Guardians completed their task and withdrew. They descended into their sacred waters, their work finished. 3 small beings who shaped everything that would follow, choosing to sleep beneath the surface while their influence radiated through every mind that would ever think, feel, or choose. They remain there still, in the deepest parts of their lakes, not quite sleeping, not quite awake, existing in that in-between state, maintaining the foundation of consciousness through their mere presence. Occasionally they stir. When they do, reality itself trembles, because they aren't just powerful beings. They are the structure that allows power to be understood, valued, and wielded. Disturb the late Guardians and you disturb the roots of sentient experience. The world doesn't end. Something worse happens. Minds begin to fragment. Knowledge separates from emotion, emotion from will. The Trinity breaks down, and consciousness briefly remembers what it was like before Uxie, Mesprit and Azelf gave it shape and coherence. This is their legacy. They sleep beneath 3 lakes in Sinnoh, but their essence flows through every human and every Pokémon that has ever existed. The capacity to know, to feel, to choose, these aren't learned behaviors, they're fundamental. Written into the structure of awareness itself by 3 small beings who were among the first separations from Arceus. Every question you've ever asked carries Uxie's fingerprint. Every emotion you've ever felt flows from Mesprit's gift. Every choice you've ever made echoes Azelf's will. They are not distant gods. They are closer than breath, closer than thought. They are the framework within which thought becomes possible. But a framework needs something to frame. Consciousness needs a context. Experience requires dimensions within which to unfold. And so Arceus, having defined the interior landscape of awareness, turned its attention outward to the canvas itself, to the fundamental coordinates of reality. The universe needed structure. It needed when and where. It needed the great stage upon which all experience would play out. It needed time and space to exist. There's a question the ancient cosmologists wrestled with, one that appears in fragments across different Sinnoh texts, always phrased slightly differently, but always asking the same thing. Which came first, time or space? Did moments begin to tick forward first, creating a when for space to expand into? Or did dimensions spread outward first, providing a where for time to flow through? The answer, according to the oldest accounts, is neither and both. They emerged together, twins born from Arceus in a single act of separation. 2 halves of the same necessity. The framework of existence itself, split into complementary aspects. From the original one came Dialga, blue as deep ocean, ancient beyond measure, crowned with a diamond embedded in its chest that catches and refracts light that hasn't been created yet. Dialga, the sovereign of time, the keeper of moments, the force that allows before to become after, that transforms potential into past through the narrow gate of now. Listen closely and you can almost hear it. The heartbeat, steady, inexorable, measuring out seconds that didn't exist before Dialga gave them rhythm. Tick, 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 the universe's clock beginning its endless count. With Dialga came sequence. Cause could lead to effect. events could unfold rather than existing in eternal simultaneity. Stories became possible because now there was a first thing, a second thing, a progression from beginning toward end. But time alone would be meaningless without space. Moments need somewhere to happen, and so came Palkia, pink as dawn sky, crowned with pearls like captured stars. Its body formed from the very fabric of dimensional reality. Palkia, master of space, the architect of distance, the force that allows here to be distinct from there, that transforms infinite potential into actual locations. With each breath Palkia takes, space expands a little further, dimensions stretch, the universe grows larger, spreading outward from some central point that both exists and doesn't exist, that is everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Palkia made room, made distance, made the possibility of journey, of separation, of distinct locations where different things could happen. Mountains could rise in one place, while oceans formed in another. Life could emerge here, but not there. Diversity became possible because space provided the room for variation. Together, Dialga and Palkia constructed the stage for everything that would follow. Time allowed for change, growth, narrative. Events could unfold. Beings could evolve, meet, part. The universe became dynamic rather than static. A flower could bloom, not just exist in all states at once, but actually move from seed to sprout to blossom. A Pokémon could be born, grow stronger, age, and eventually return to the earth. Stories could be lived rather than simply being. Space provided diversity, distance, the vastness that makes exploration meaningful. Different environments could form, each with its own character. A forest here, a desert there, mountains in one direction and ocean in another. Beings could move through this tapestry, encountering new places, new challenges, new wonders. This was the gift, the framework within which all experience could happen. You can feel it, can't you? The way time carries you forward whether you want it to or not. The way space surrounds you, extends beyond you in all directions, creates the distance between yourself and everything else. These aren't abstract concepts. They're the fundamental coordinates of your existence. You live in time. You occupy space. Dialga and Palkia made this possible. The old texts described them as twin dragons, circling each other in an eternal dance. Not fighting exactly, but not in perfect harmony either. Tension and balance. Space wants to expand infinitely. Time wants to flow without interruption. They pull against each other, and in that tension, stable reality emerges. But here's where the gift reveals its cost. Time brought mortality. Every moment that passes means something ends. Every second brings you closer to the termination of whatever you are, whatever you're doing, whatever you love. The flower that blooms will wilt. The child that's born will age. The bond you form will eventually face the moment when one of you continues and the other doesn't. Dialga gave the universe the capacity for stories, but every story has an ending, and the ending is death. Not as punishment, not as flaw, but as structural necessity. For time to be meaningful, things must change, and change followed to its conclusion means dissolution. Space created separation, distance between beings. The loneliness of existing here while what you love exists there. The ache of watching someone walk away until they're too far to see. The knowledge that there are places you'll never reach, beings you'll never meet, experiences you'll never have because they're happening somewhere else, too far for you to bridge the gap. Palkia made the universe vast and beautiful, but vastness means isolation, means that no matter how much you explore, there's always more beyond your reach. means that you occupy one small point in infinite space and everything else is elsewhere, fundamentally separate from where you are. What time and space gave with one hand, they took with the other. The framework that makes existence rich and meaningful also makes it painful and limited. You cannot have stories without endings, cannot have diversity without distance, cannot have growth without loss. The ancient writers understood this. They described Dialga and Palkia not as heroes or villains, but as necessary forces, beautiful and terrible, the architects of reality's basic structure, which is also reality's basic tragedy. And these twin titans, having shaped the dimensions of existence, withdrew to their own domains. Dialga retreated to a temporal dimension that exists sideways to normal time, a place where past, present, and future blur together, where the heartbeat that measures the universe's moments can continue without interruption. Palkia descended into a spatial dimension that folds through normal space without occupying it, a place where all distances are one distance, where here and there collapse into the same location, seen from different angles. They sleep there, mostly. Or perhaps sleep isn't the right word. They maintain. They exist. Their mere presence keeps time flowing and space expanding. Occasionally the fabric of reality grows thin, and you can glimpse them, rare, precious, terrifying moments when the framework itself becomes visible. But disturb them, conflict between them, and catastrophe follows. Because they don't just inhabit reality, they are reality. Dialga isn't in time, Dialga is time. Dialga isn't in space, Palkia is space. When they clash, when the balance between them breaks, the fundamental coordinates of existence begin to tear apart. The legends speak of such moments, times when Dialga and Palkia fought, and regions experienced temporal loops, spatial inversions, moments stretching into hours while miles compressed into inches. The universe flickering, unstable, threatening to unmake itself because the framework holding it together had turned against itself. This is their legacy. They shaped dimensions that would become both home and prison. Time marches forward, indifferent to joy or suffering, carrying everything toward its eventual end. Space expands endlessly, beautiful and isolating, making the universe vast enough for infinite variation, but too vast for anything to ever be truly together. You live within their creation. Every second that passes is Dialga's gift and curse. Every step you take through space is Palkia's offering and price. But for all this order, for all this careful construction of when and where, creation remained incomplete. Because reality isn't just what happens in the light, it's also what hides in shadow. Not just matter, but antimatter. Not just order, but chaos. Not just presence, but absence. The framework needed one more architect, one more force to complete the Trinity, and this one Arceus would banish. There are passages in the oldest Sinnoh text that have been deliberately obscured, not destroyed. The priests who maintained these records were too reverent for that, but obscured, written in archaic dialects, preserved in temple basements, copied reluctantly and always with warnings attached. They speak of the third dragon, the shadow to Dialga and Palkia's light, the necessary opposite, Giratina. It emerged alongside its siblings, or perhaps a heartbeat after. The texts aren't clear. What they do make clear is that where Dialga embodied time's flow and Palkia embodied space's expansion, Giratina embodied something else, something that made the ancient scribes uncomfortable even as they acknowledged its necessity. Antimatter, reversal, the opposite principle. Not evil, though it would be easy to call it that. Not malicious, though its nature tends toward destruction. Giratina represented the counterbalance, the shadow that defines light by contrast, the absence that gives presence meaning, the chaos that makes order visible. Picture it: 6 black wings like torn membranes, red striping across a body that seems to exist slightly out of phase with normal reality, eyes that glow with something that isn't quite malevolence but isn't warmth either, a presence that feels wrong not because it shouldn't exist, but because it exists too correctly in a way that threatens everything around it. Where Dialga maintained time's progression, Giratina could reverse it. Where Palkia structured space into navigable dimensions, Giratina could invert it, fold it, make it eat itself. The dragon of Antimatter, capable of unmaking what its siblings made. And Arceus looked at what it had created and recognized the danger, not because Giratina was a mistake. The texts are careful about this point. Giratina was exactly what it was meant to be. The problem was that what it was meant to be couldn't coexist with ordered reality without threatening to unmake that reality moment by moment. So Arceus made a choice. The first exile, the first separation that felt like punishment. It banished Giratina to the Distortion world. Imagine a dimension that exists parallel to ours but inverted, where gravity flows upward instead of down, where water floats in the air and land drifts like clouds, where time pulls in strange eddies instead of flowing forward, where space folds back on itself in impossible geometries that would shatter normal minds trying to comprehend them. Not a prison, exactly, or perhaps the most fundamental prison possible. A universe designed specifically to contain something too dangerous for normal existence. A reverse world, mirror dark, beautiful in its wrongness. And into this twisted dimension, Arceus cast Giratina. The texts describe it almost apologetically, as if the ancient writers understood that what happened was both necessary and tragic. Giratina didn't choose violence. Violence was its nature. It didn't seek to destroy. Destruction was what it was made to do. And for that, for being exactly what Arceus created it to be, it was exiled. On the surface, this seemed protective. A dangerous force removed from an ordered universe. The Distortion world would absorb Giratina's destructive potential, containing it safely away from the delicate balance that Dialga and Palkia maintained. And it worked, in its way. The Distortion world became a kind of cosmic filter. When reality experienced violations, paradoxes that couldn't be resolved, timeline breaks that couldn't be healed, spatial impossibilities that threatened to spread, they drained into the Distortion world. Giratina's domain absorbed what normal reality couldn't contain. But this is where the shadow side emerges, darker than even the darkness of exile itself. In banishing Giratina, Arceus cast away part of itself. Remember, every act of creation was an act of self-division. Arceus made the universe from its own essence, and Giratina, no less than Dialga or Palkia, was a fragment of the original one, the shadow self, the aspect deemed too dangerous to keep close. This created the first wound, the first rejection, the first hint that creation might not be purely benevolent, that the universe might be built on uncomfortable necessities and painful choices. Giratina became resentment incarnate. Not because it was evil, but because it was alone, separated not just physically but existentially. It existed for a purpose, to be the counterbalance, but was denied the companionship its siblings enjoyed. It maintained reality by being excluded from reality, and that resentment, that wound, never healed, couldn't heal, because Giratina's exile wasn't temporary, wasn't a mistake to be corrected. It was structural, permanent, the price of keeping existence stable. The legacy of this moment echoes through everything that followed. The distortion world exists still parallel to ours, touching it at strange angles. Occasionally the barrier grows thin. Occasionally you can glimpse it, reality flickering, physics bending, the mirror world bleeding through. And when that happens, you might catch sight of Giratina, watching from beyond. Neither fully evil nor fully exiled, neither villain nor victim. Something more complicated, something that defies easy categorization. It serves a purpose Arceus didn't initially intend, or perhaps intended all along. The distortion world doesn't just contain Giratina, it contains everything reality rejects, every violation, every paradox, every impossibility. Like a wound in the fabric of existence that prevents infection from spreading by gathering all the poison in one place, Giratina maintains this, tends it in its way, not out of love or duty, but because it is what it is, the keeper of Antimatter, the guardian of what must be kept separate. But the cost of this service is isolation, and isolation sustained across eons creates something cold and bitter, something that remembers being whole and hates the separation, something that watches the ordered world from behind a dimensional barrier and dreams of revenge or reunion, or perhaps can no longer distinguish between the two. The ancient texts warn about this. They speak of times when Giratina breaks through, when the barrier weakens enough for the dragon of Antimatter to touch normal reality again. And when that happens, the results are catastrophic. Not because Giratina seeks destruction actively, but because its very nature unmakes, its presence reverses. Contact with it is contact with the opposite principle, and opposites annihilate. This is the terrible arithmetic of existence. Order requires chaos to define itself against. Light requires shadow. Presence requires absence. But these opposites cannot occupy the same space without mutual destruction. So they must be separated, and the separation creates wounds that cannot heal. Giratina represents this truth made flesh, the necessary opposite, exiled for being necessary, the shadow that makes light visible, banished for casting that shadow. The price of cosmic balance, paid by one who maintains that balance through its own exclusion. And in its reverse world, Giratina waits, not patiently, not forgiven or forgiving, but there, always there, holding the space that reality cannot hold, maintaining existence by being outside existence. The framework was complete now, time and space to give reality structure, antimatter and distortion to provide counterbalance. The cosmic order established, however imperfectly. But Arceus looked at what it had made, this vast empty framework of time and space and shadow, and recognized that structure alone wasn't enough. The universe needed more than dimensions and forces. It needed something softer, something closer. It needed life that could walk and breathe and dream upon the physical world itself. And so Arceus turned its attention downward towards something smaller, gentler, and infinitely more diverse. There's a shift that happens in the ancient texts around this point. The language changes, becomes warmer somehow, less cosmic, more intimate. The creation story moves from vast abstractions, time, space, antimatter, to something you can almost touch. The universe had its framework, its dimensions and forces, but it was still empty in the way that matters most. No small joys, no quiet moments, no life experiencing itself in all the minor, precious ways that make existence feel real. Arceus recognized this. Or perhaps it simply continued the pattern it had begun, dividing itself, scattering its essence across creation, transforming unity into beautiful multiplicity. From itself once more came something new, not vast like Dialga or Palkia, not terrible like Giratina, Small, pink, almost childlike in appearance, with large blue eyes that radiate curiosity rather than cosmic power. A being you could hold in your arms, though it would never stay still long enough for you to try. Where Arceus created from above, Mew created from within. The texts describe it as the ancestor, the mother of diversity, a single being that contained within its tiny form the genetic blueprint for every Pokémon that would ever exist. Not through grand cosmic acts, but through something more intimate, more biological, more alive. Mew possessed the gift of transformation. It could become anything, shift its form, its type, its nature. One moment a creature of fire, the next a being of water. 1 hour taking flight, the next burrowing deep underground. Every possibility of physical existence contained in one playful, curious entity. And from this gift of transformation came descendants, countless descendants. Mew didn't create species through divine proclamation. It lived them, adapted to different environments, and those adaptations persisted, becoming distinct forms. A Mew that stayed in water long enough became something else. A Mew that lived in forests took on characteristics suited to trees and shadows. A Mew that climbed mountains developed traits for high altitude and cold. Generation after generation, variation after variation. The branching tree of life spreading outward from a single source. This was the gift. This was what Mew brought to creation. Life descended from the cosmic to the earthly, from abstract principles to tangible forms. The universe became inhabited not just by forces and titans, but by creatures, Pokémon in infinite variety, each adapted to its niche, each carrying a spark of the divine, but expressed in accessible, touchable ways. Oceans filled with swimming forms, skies filled with wings. Forests became alive with rustling and movement. Grasslands teemed with herds. Mountains housed colonies. Even the deepest caves and the harshest deserts found inhabitants suited to their challenges. The world became full, truly full, not with emptiness structured by time and space, but with actual living presence, with beings that ate and slept and played and fought and raised young, and eventually returned to the earth, so the cycle could continue. And Mew wandered among them all, its descendants, playing in places where no eyes could find it. A flash of pink in deep jungles, a giggle echoing from abandoned ruins, present but unseen, delighting in the diversity it had sparked. This was beautiful. This was the universe becoming gentle, becoming small enough to hold, becoming real in ways that cosmic forces could never be real. But life brought something else with it. Something the texts acknowledge with quiet sorrow. Life meant death, not just eventual death, though that too, but immediate, constant, necessary death. Because living things need energy, and energy must come from somewhere, from something. Mew's gift of biological diversity created ecosystems, and ecosystems are built on consumption. The small fish that swims in the lake becomes food for the larger fish. The larger fish becomes food for the bird that dives from above. The bird eventually dies and feeds the soil, which feeds the plants, which feed the small fish. Round and round, each living thing sustained by the ending of other living things. This is the food chain, the web of predation, red in tooth and claw as the old phrase goes. Beautiful in its complexity, terrible in its necessity. Every Pokémon that lived meant others must be eaten, must be consumed, must end so that others could continue. There was no malice in it, no cruelty, just the stark mathematics of biology. Life feeds on life, has to, no way around it. And with this came new forms of suffering. Not the existential suffering of separation from unity, but immediate physical suffering. hunger, pain, fear, the prey animal knowing the predator approaches, the wounded creature unable to escape, the parent watching offspring fail to survive. Mew had brought life down to Earth, but Earth is a hard place, a place where survival is never guaranteed, where comfort is temporary, where every moment of peace exists in the context of struggle. The old texts don't shy away from this. They describe it clearly, as if the ancient writers wanted to acknowledge that creation's beauty and creation's cruelty are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. The same process that fills the world with wonder also fills it with predation. And Mew, perhaps recognizing this, perhaps simply following its nature, began to withdraw, not dying, not truly leaving, but becoming scarce, rare, more rumor than reality. It retreated from the world it had populated, becoming myth and mystery. Some say Mew still wanders in places humans rarely reach, deep jungles where canopy blocks the sky, island caves accessible only at certain tides, mountain peaks above the permanent snowline, places where the world remains a little bit wild, a little bit untouched. Others say Mew exists in a different state now, not quite physical, not quite spirit, flickering between forms so rapidly that it becomes invisible, all possibilities held in superposition. But whether present or absent, Mew's legacy remained still. Every Pokémon that exists carries Mew's genetic signature somewhere in its code. The capacity for transformation, even if limited, the potential for evolution, for change, for adaptation, the fundamental kinship that makes all Pokémon, however different they appear, descendants of one source. A Charizard and a Magikarp share an ancestor, a Mewtwo and a Pidgey branch from the same tree. Enemies and partners alike, all children of Mew, all carrying within them the memory of that first playful being that decided the universe needed not just forces and frameworks, but actual, living, breathing creatures, and humans too, perhaps. The texts are less clear about this, but some scholars argue that humans also descend from Mew's transformative gift, that we're simply another branch on the tree of life, another adaptation specialized for intelligence and tool use and language, another experiment in what biological existence could become. If that's true, and the evidence suggests it might be, then the line between Pokémon and human is even thinner than it appears. We're all Mew's children, all fragments of that descent from cosmic to earthly, all alive in the same fundamental way, sustained by the same cruel necessities, experiencing the same joys and sorrows. This is Mew's legacy. It brought divinity down to earth, made the cosmic touchable, filled an empty framework with actual life in all its messy, beautiful, predatory, wonderful complexity. The world was no longer just structure. It was alive, teeming, full of small creatures pursuing their small purposes, unaware that they carried within them the essence of something vast and playful and divine. But life, once established, began to organize itself in patterns. Power concentrated. Certain Pokémon rose above others, not through cosmic design, but through natural dominance. The elements themselves found champions, and these champions would shape the physical world as surely as Dialga and Palkia shaped its dimensions. The world was alive now. Mew's descendants spread across every environment, adapting, evolving, filling niches, but life, left to its own devices, creates imbalances. Power concentrates, forces amplify. Without something to moderate them, the elements themselves can spiral out of control. The ancient texts speak of a period of chaos, not the primordial chaos before creation, but earthly chaos, the chaos of a young world finding its equilibrium through violence. Volcanoes erupted without pattern, Oceans swelled and receded unpredictably. Storms raged and dissipated with no rhythm. The land itself heaved and cracked as tectonic forces pushed against each other, with nothing to mediate their conflicts. Life struggled to gain purchase in this instability. Species emerged and went extinct in rapid succession. The world was alive, yes, but it was also convulsing, trying to find balance through trial and error, and the errors were catastrophic. And so, from this chaos, or perhaps to address this chaos, legendary Pokémon began to emerge, not created directly by Arceus this time. Or perhaps they were. The texts are unclear, and maybe the distinction doesn't matter. What matters is that across the world, certain Pokémon rose to embody elemental forces, to champion them, to keep them in check. 3 domains needed masters: land, sea, and sky, the fundamental divisions of the physical world. From deep beneath the Earth's crust came Groudon, massive, ancient beyond measuring, its body formed from cooled magma and continental bedrock, red markings across grey-black skin that glow when its power stirs, like cracks in the earth revealing the molten fury beneath, the embodiment of land itself, of tectonic force, of the planet's slow, grinding power. Where ground walked, continents rose, mountains thrust upward from flat plains, dry land expanded, pushing back the oceans. It didn't do this with intention, exactly. It simply was what it was, and its presence reshaped geography through sheer existence. From the deepest ocean trenches rose Kyogre, equally massive, equally ancient, blue and white like storm-tossed waves, with markings that pulse with the rhythm of tides, the embodiment of water, of ocean, of the vast liquid world that covers most of the planet's surface. Where Kyogre swam, seas expanded, rain fell in torrents, coastlines flooded. It brought water's gift, life-giving moisture, the medium in which the first organisms evolved, but also water's threat, drowning, erosion, the patient wearing away of everything solid. And above both, in the atmosphere where neither could reach, came Rayquaza, serpentine. Green as deep jungle, yellow markings like captured lightning, the dragon of the sky, embodiment of wind and weather, keeper of the boundary between earth and void. Rayquaza flew through the upper atmosphere, maintaining the delicate balance of air pressure and wind patterns that make weather predictable enough for life to adapt to. It didn't govern sky the way Groudon governed land or Kyogre governed sea. It governed the space between, the interface where all 3 elements met. These 3 formed a trinity: land, sea, and sky, each powerful enough to reshape the world, each necessary for life to flourish, and each, left unchecked, capable of overwhelming the others. The legends speak of their clashes, times when Groudon and Kyogre met in battle, and the results reshaped continents, land and sea fighting for dominance, neither able to accept balance, both driven by their natures to expand at the other's expense. When they fought, civilizations drowned or burned. Mountain ranges appeared overnight, ocean basins drained or overflowed. The world convulsed, caught between 2 titanic forces that couldn't coexist peacefully. And when this happened, when the balance threatened to break entirely, Rayquaza descended, not as peacemaker exactly, as enforcer. It would strike them both, drive them back into dormancy, restore the equilibrium through sheer overwhelming force, sky asserting dominance over both land and sea, reminding them that neither could exist without the atmosphere that connected them. This was the gift these 3 provided: stabilization, balance through power. They prevented any single element from overwhelming the others, made the world navigable, predictable, safe enough for smaller, frailer life to flourish. But they weren't the only legendary trios. Across different regions, other trinities emerged to maintain elemental balance. In the far north, 3 birds took flight: Articuno, ice made avian, blue wings trailing frost, bringing winter wherever it flew. The embodiment of cold, of stillness, of water in its frozen state. Zapdos, lightning given form, yellow feathers crackling with electrical discharge, each wing beat generating static that builds into thunderstorms. The embodiment of energy, of sudden release, of power moving from sky to earth. Moltres, fire and flight combined, orange flames that never extinguish, heat that drives air currents and creates weather patterns. The embodiment of warmth, of transformation through burning, of light in darkness. These 3 governed weather itself, not creating it. Weather emerges from the interaction of temperature, pressure, and moisture, but channeling it, focusing it, preventing any single pattern from dominating. And in another land, 3 beasts walked. Raikou, thunder's roar given physical form, yellow and black, crackling with electricity that arcs between its fangs. Born from lightning, some say, when a storm struck an ancient tower and gave life to elemental fury. Entei, the volcano's heart walking on 4 legs, brown and cream wreathed in smoke, its bark causing eruptions in distant mountains. Born from fire, the legends claim, when that same tower burned and rage took shape. Suicune, the north wind crystallized into grace, blue and white like purified water, its presence cleaning polluted lakes and streams. Born from wind and rain, they say, when the tower's ashes scattered and compassion survived destruction. These 3 wandered, each following its own path, but together maintaining a balance between storm, fire, and flowing water. Guardians not through deliberate protection but through their mere existence, their power preventing any single force from overwhelming the landscape. And beneath the waves, Lugia slept, silver and aerodynamic, wings that could create storms with a single flap or calm them with perfect stillness. It rested in ocean depths, rising only when the legendary bird's conflicts threatened to spiral out of control. Its presence a reminder that even the embodiments of elements must respect limits. This was the gift of all these legendary Pokémon. They stabilized the young world, made it consistent enough for life to adapt to, predictable enough for civilizations to eventually emerge. They were power in service of balance, might wielded to create peace through deterrence. But here's the shadow that gift casts. Their power made them dangerous, necessary and dangerous, inseparable qualities. When Groudon and Kyogre fought in earnest, continents reformed. When the legendary birds clashed, entire regions experienced climate chaos. When the beasts' paths crossed in anger, the land itself bore scars for generations. Their protection was also their threat. They were forces too vast to fully control, barely containing their own strength, walking the knife's edge between guardian and catastrophe. And they couldn't always prevent disaster. Sometimes they were the disaster. Sometimes their very presence destabilized what they meant to protect. A sleeping Groudon causing droughts simply by dreaming. A disturbed Articuno bringing endless winter. A startled Zapdos triggering electromagnetic pulses that scrambled the nervous systems of every creature within miles. The ancient peoples learned to fear them even as they revered them. Built shrines and observances designed not to summon these beings, but to keep them asleep, keep them distant, keep them content in their hidden places. Because summoning them, disturbing them, drawing their attention, these actions had consequences that rippled across entire ecosystems. The legacy they left is complex. They retreated eventually to hidden places, Groudon to magma chambers deep beneath the Earth's crust, Kyogre to trenches where sunlight never reaches, Rayquaza to the upper atmosphere where air thins toward vacuum, the legendary birds to remote mountains and isolated islands, the beasts to their eternal wandering, seen rarely and never for long. They sleep or drift, mostly content to let the world turn, but they can be awakened, and when they are, when someone foolish or desperate enough disturbs their rest, the consequences reshape geography itself. This is what it means to have gods who are also natural forces. They maintain reality, yes. They keep balance, yes. But they are not safe, not benevolent in any way that cares about individual lives. They operate on scales too vast for human concerns to register. The world needed them, still needs them. But needing something and wanting it near are different things entirely. And beneath all this physical power, beneath the management of elements and weather and geological forces, a stranger truth waited, because for all their might, Groudon and Kyogre and Rayquaza were still just Pokémon. Powerful, yes. Ancient and elemental, yes. But ultimately bound by the same rules that governed all physical existence. There was something else. Something that existed between thought and reality. Something that suggested the universe was less solid than it appeared. More malleable than anyone suspected. The unknown had been watching since creation's beginning, and it was time finally to understand what they were. You've seen them in the background of this story, mentioned briefly when Arceus first emerged, flickering at the edges of creation like static, like glitches in the code of existence itself, strange symbols hovering in spaces between moments, between thoughts, between what is and what might be, the unknown. For the longest time, even the ancient scholars didn't understand them. The text described them with uncertainty, unusual in documents otherwise confident about cosmic truths. They're there in every account of creation, but always peripheral, always watching, never quite explained. 28 forms, 26 matching the letters of an alphabet that wouldn't be invented for eons. 2 more, punctuation marks, exclamation and question, as if reality itself needed emphasis and inquiry. Each one simple, flat, almost childlike in design. A single eye staring from a body shaped like a symbol. They look harmless, decorative even, like alphabet blocks scattered across the universe by some cosmic child who forgot to put them away. But look closer. Look at what happens when they gather. The text describes ruins, ancient structures that predate any known civilization. Chambers where Unown cluster in the thousands, swirling in patterns that hurt to watch, that make the air shimmer and twist. And in those chambers, reality bends. Not metaphorically, literally, physically. Thoughts become things, wishes manifest. The barrier between mind and matter grows thin, then vanishes entirely. This is what the unknown are. This is what they've always been. They are living letters, psychic glyphs, symbols that exist in the space between concept and reality. And when enough of them gather, when they swirl together in specific patterns, they don't just observe the universe, they write it. Think about what that means. Really think about it. Reality solid, dependable, governed by rules and forces, and the careful balance maintained by legendary Pokémon. Reality is actually text, a story being written moment by moment, and the unknown are the alphabet, the building blocks, the individual letters that spell existence into being. They have no individual consciousness. The texts are clear about this. A single unknown is nearly mindless, a simple being with a simple nature. But together, collectively, they become something else entirely. A distributed intelligence, a hive mind made of symbols, and this hive mind, whether it knows what it's doing or not, shapes what is real. The old accounts describe experiments, scholars who entered unknown ruins and thought about something specific, focused their will on a single concept, and watched as the unknown began to swirl, to arrange themselves, to spell out that concept in patterns of living glyphs, and then watched as the concept manifested, became actual, crossed from imagination into existence because enough unknown had agreed to write it into reality. This is the gift, the revelation, the truth. The unknown demonstrates simply by existing. Consciousness shapes reality. Thoughts have power. The barrier between mind and matter is thinner than we imagine. Or rather, the barrier only exists because we imagine it does, and imagination is itself a form of creation. The universe is collaborative, participatory, not fixed and determined, but fluid and responsive. What you believe possible influences what becomes possible. What you focus on with enough intensity, enough clarity, enough sustained will, that thing edges closer to manifestation. The Unown prove this. They are the mechanism by which thought becomes thing, the interface between psychic energy and physical reality, the living proof that existence is less like a machine and more like a story, and stories can be rewritten if you know the alphabet. But here's where the gift reveals its terrible shadow. If reality can be rewritten by thought, nothing is certain. Everything you perceive as solid truth, the ground beneath your feet, the laws of physics, the progression of time, the stability of space, all of it might be only consensus. Only what the collective unconscious has agreed is real. Change that agreement, gather enough unknown, focus enough psychic will, and anything could shift. The floor could become ceiling. Water could burn. Time could run backward, not as violation of natural law, but as revision of what natural law is. This is terrifying in ways the other revelations weren't. Dialga and Palkia are vast and dangerous, but they're consistent. Giratina is dark and exiled, but it follows its nature. Even Groudon and Kyogre, for all their destructive potential, operate according to predictable patterns. The Unown operate according to no pattern anyone understands. They spell out messages that seem prophetic or random. They respond to thoughts they shouldn't be able to detect. They write stories with no author, creating effects with no conscious intention behind them. They are the ultimate uncertainty, the proof that the universe isn't finished, that creation is ongoing, that the story being told might change at any moment, and there's no guarantee the next chapter will follow logically from what came before. Imagine living with that knowledge, truly absorbing it. The world you trust is only as stable as the collective psychic agreement that maintains it. The Unown could, theoretically, rewrite anything, everything. They probably won't. They seem content to cluster in their ruins, spelling out cryptic messages, but the could remains. The ancient texts describe this revelation with something like awe and something like horror, as if the writers recognized they'd stumbled onto a truth that undermined every other certainty. And the Unown themselves offer no comfort, no explanation. They cluster in their dimensional ruins, occasionally spelling out words that might be messages or might be random patterns. Sometimes they swirl around individuals who wander into their territory, responding to thoughts and dreams and fears in ways that make those mental states briefly real. But they don't communicate, don't explain, don't seem to care about the implications of what they are. They simply exist. Living letters in an alphabet most beings can't read, writing a story no one can fully comprehend, maintaining their vigil at the intersection of thought and reality, where the two blur into something that might be either or both or neither. This is their legacy. They remind us that creation is ongoing, that reality isn't finished, that the story being told might change at any moment, that the universe is stranger and more fluid than even the cosmic forces suggested. They are the ultimate open question, the mystery that won't resolve into answer, the proof that some things exist beyond explanation, that consciousness and reality are more entangled than separate, that the foundation of existence is less solid than we need it to be, and scattered across the world in ruins that predate civilization, the unknown continue their work, spelling out messages, responding to thoughts, writing reality one symbol at a time, following patterns they don't understand, serving purposes they don't comprehend. Are they tools? Are they observers? Are they the authors of existence, or merely the alphabet it's written in? The texts don't answer, can't answer, because maybe there is no answer. Maybe the Aegean are simply what happens when the universe becomes conscious enough to write itself, and the writing is all that matters, not the writer or the reader or the meaning. But understanding the unknown, or failing to understand them, but at least recognizing what they represent, leads to a different question, one that circles back to an earlier moment in the creation story. Giratina's exile, the distortion world, the reverse dimension where physics bend backward and reality inverts itself. It seemed like punishment, like exile, like the shadow cast away so light could remain pure. But what if it wasn't? What if, like the Unown's apparent randomness, there was purpose hidden in what looked like rejection? What if the distortion world wasn't a prison, but a necessity? What if Giratina's isolation served a function no one initially understood? Look back at everything we've learned so far. The pattern repeats, doesn't it? Every gift contains its price. Every creation requires sacrifice. Unity shatters into multiplicity. Time brings mortality. Space creates distance. Life demands death. Power threatens destruction. And exile, it turns out, serves maintenance. The ancient texts contain a curious footnote, a passage often skipped because it interrupts the narrative flow, because it asks readers to reconsider something already established. It appears in different forms across different manuscripts, but the essence remains consistent. It asks, what happens to mistakes? In a universe built through division and creation, where Arceus scattered itself across countless forms, where reality itself can be rewritten by the Unown, where legendary Pokémon clash with continent-shaping force. What happens when something goes wrong? When timelines fracture, when spatial dimensions fold incorrectly, when paradoxes emerge that can't be resolved within normal physics, when the unknown spells something that shouldn't exist, and it starts existing anyway. Where do these violations go? The answer, written carefully in margins and footnotes, is the distortion world. Think back to Giratina's exile, Arceus banishing the dragon of Antimatter to a reverse dimension. It looked like punishment, the dangerous child locked away for everyone's safety, the shadow separated from light because they couldn't coexist. But look at it differently. Look at what the distortion world actually does. It's not a prison. It's a filter, a quarantine zone, a cosmic error handler. Every system needs one. Every creation requires a place for what doesn't fit. And the distortion world, with its inverted physics and impossible geometries, is uniquely suited to contain what normal reality cannot hold. When time breaks, when cause precedes effect, when moments loop back on themselves, when paradoxes threaten to cascade through Dialga's carefully maintained flow, those temporal violations drain into the distortion world. There, where time doesn't flow forward but pools and eddies, the paradoxes don't matter. They can exist without threatening the structure of normal reality. When space tears, when dimensions fold through themselves, when distances become negative, when locations occupy the same coordinates, when Palkia's framework glitches, those spatial impossibilities bleed through to the distortion world. There, where up is down and near is far, and geometry bends backward, the violations find equilibrium. They're absorbed, neutralized through existing in a place designed for impossibility. When the unknown writes something that contradicts fundamental laws, when legendary battles create effects that shouldn't persist, when reality experiences errors it can't self-correct, all of it drains into the distortion world. And Giratina maintains this, tends it, not as punishment for some cosmic crime, but as purpose, as function. The dragon of Antimatter wasn't cast away because it was evil. It was positioned where Antimatter needed to be, where the opposite principle could serve creation by being separate from creation. Think about that. Really sit with it. Giratina's exile wasn't rejection. It was assignment. The loneliest job in existence, yes, the most isolating position possible, but necessary in ways that make the necessity almost cruel. Because without the distortion world, without somewhere for reality's errors to go, the universe would be rigid, brittle, perfect in the way that means fragile. One paradox, one unresolvable violation, and the whole structure might shatter. But with the distortion world, reality gains flexibility, resilience, the ability to make mistakes and survive them, to experience violations and absorb them without breaking. Imperfection becomes possible, and imperfection, paradoxically, makes existence more stable, not less. A perfect system has no room for error, which means no room for growth, for change, for evolution. Everything must follow predetermined patterns exactly. Any deviation threatens collapse. But a system that can handle errors, that has a place for what doesn't fit, that can absorb contradictions and continue functioning, that system can adapt, can evolve, can accommodate the unexpected without unmaking itself. This is the gift the distortion world provides. Flexibility through separation, stability through having a place for instability, order maintained by keeping a space for chaos. But the price, as always, is heavy. Giratina pays it, has been paying it since the moment of creation, will pay it, presumably, until creation ends, if it ends. The price is isolation. Complete, structural, unchangeable isolation. Not because Giratina is too dangerous to allow near others, though that's partially true, but because its function requires separation. It has to exist outside normal reality to maintain normal reality, has to be alone to serve the purpose it was made for. Understanding this doesn't erase the resentment, doesn't heal the wound. Being necessary doesn't mean being happy. Having purpose doesn't prevent loneliness. Giratina still watches from beyond the dimensional barrier, still feels the separation as rejection. Even if it intellectually understands the function, still carries the weight of being the only one who must remain apart, while everything else gets to exist together. The texts describe its nature with nuance rare in ancient documents, not villain, not victim, something more complex, a being that serves creation by being excluded from it, that maintains reality by existing in unreality, that enables connection by accepting eternal disconnection. And the distortion world itself reflects this complexity. Visit it, though few can, though fewer still return. And you don't find horror exactly, you find wrongness. Yes, physics inverted, gravity reversed, space folded through impossible angles. But you also find strange beauty, platforms floating in void, waterfalls flowing upward, light refracting through geometries that shouldn't exist. It's unsettling, disorienting, fundamentally alien to beings evolved for normal reality. But it's also mesmerizing, organized in its chaos, purposeful in its inversion. It's what reality looks like from the other side. The mirror world showing what normal existence rejects, contains, hides from itself. And Giratina moves through this landscape with something like grace, not happy perhaps, not content, but suited to its environment in ways that suggest this isn't entirely exile. It belongs there in the reversed world, fits it, shapes it, and is shaped by it. The legacy of this revelation changes everything we thought we understood. Creation isn't benevolent, isn't malevolent either. It's complex, nuanced, built on difficult choices and necessary separations and prices that must be paid by someone. So Giratina pays them. The distortion world exists as proof that the universe needs imperfection, needs error handling, needs a place for what doesn't fit. And Giratina exists as proof that maintaining this necessity requires sacrifice, ongoing, permanent sacrifice that one being shoulders so all others don't have to. It's not fair. The texts don't claim it's fair. They simply acknowledge that fairness wasn't part of the equation. Function was, necessity was, and Giratina fulfilled both by accepting isolation. Does it hate this? Probably. Does it resent Arceus for creating it this way? The evidence suggests yes. Does it sometimes break through the dimensional barrier, driven by that resentment, seeking connection or revenge, or perhaps no longer distinguishing between the two? Yes. And when that happens, reality trembles. Because Giratina bringing antimatter into normal matter creates mutual annihilation. Not from malice necessarily, just from being what it is in a space not designed for what it is. So the barrier must hold, the separation must continue, the wound must stay open so the larger body can heal around it. And Giratina watches still, neither villain nor hero, neither prisoner nor guardian, something that transcends simple categories, the keeper of distortion, the maintainer of the reverse world, the one who serves by being separate, the necessary opposite, necessary isolation, necessary price for a universe flexible enough to contain both order and chaos, both perfection and error, both unity and multiplicity. Understanding this, holding this complexity, we arrive at the final question, the one that circles back to the beginning, and asks whether anything we've learned suggests an ending. Because if the universe can handle errors, if reality is more fluid than solid, if consciousness shapes existence and symbols write the world, then what happens next? Where does this all lead? Is there a conclusion to the creation story, or does it simply continue, cycling through the same patterns at different scales, repeating the original separation in infinite variations? There's a meditation practice described in the oldest Sinnoh texts. The monks who maintained these records would sit in silence and contemplate a single question. Did Arceus create the universe once, or is it creating the universe constantly, every moment, forever? The question seems abstract, academic, but sit with it long enough and it starts to shift how you see everything. Because if creation happened once, in the distant past, then everything since is merely consequence, the universe unwinding according to initial conditions. We're living in aftermath, in the echo of that first moment when Arceus emerged from the cosmic egg. But if creation is ongoing, continuous, never finished, then right now this moment is as much part of creation as the beginning was. The universe isn't done being made. The story isn't finished being written. We're not living in aftermath. We're living in the middle of the act. The texts suggest the second interpretation, and they go further. They suggest that creation doesn't just continue. It cycles, repeats, returns to its beginning in order to begin again. Like a wheel turning through darkness and light, like breath drawing in and releasing, like seasons rotating through their endless pattern. Arceus sleeps and wakes, has slept and woken before, will sleep and wake again. The cosmic egg didn't appear once. It appears whenever conditions align, whenever the universe completes a cycle and returns to potential, to that pregnant void before existence, before time, before space. And from that egg, Arceus emerges again, creates again, scatters itself again into the framework of reality. Dialga and Palkia are born again. Time begins again to flow. Space begins again to expand. Giratina is exiled again. The wound opens again. The distortion world forms again to catch reality's errors. The lake guardians emerge again to define consciousness. Mew descends again to fill the world with life. Legendary trios rise again to balance the elements. The same story over and over. Not identical, the details shift, variations emerge. Each cycle slightly different from the last, but the pattern holds, the structure repeats. This is what the ancient scholars meant by the eternal return. Not that time loops back to a specific point, but that creation itself is cyclical, that the universe breathes, expands into complexity, then contracts back to unity, then expands again. And if you look closely at the world, you can see smaller versions of this pattern everywhere. Civilizations rise and fall. Cities built on ruins, built on older ruins. Knowledge discovered, lost, rediscovered centuries later. The same myths appearing in different cultures separated by oceans and millennia, as if humanity keeps remembering and forgetting the same truths. Pokémon themselves cycle through this pattern. Death returns them to eggs. Eggs hatch into new life. The same species, the same types, the same natures, reborn generation after generation. Not reincarnation exactly, but something similar, the pattern persisting across individual endings. Even legendary Pokémon experience this. The texts speak of times when Groudon and Kyogre clashed, were defeated, and slept for centuries before stirring again, as if they too cycle through activity and dormancy, death and rebirth, following rhythms too vast for human lifespans to perceive. And the Unown, those living letters, spell it out in their cryptic messages, words about cycles, about returns, about beginnings that are also endings. They see it, perhaps, the pattern, the wheel, the eternal repetition that makes nothing truly final. This is the gift of cycles. Nothing is final. Mistakes can be corrected over time. Lost knowledge returns. Broken bonds can be reformed. If not in this iteration, then in the next. Death leads to rebirth. Endings contain beginnings. The universe is more forgiving than linear time suggests, more patient, more willing to give second chances, third chances, infinite chances. Because if the cycle continues, every loss is temporary. Every ending is just a pause before the next beginning. But here's the shadow. Here's the price. If cycles repeat, patterns repeat, including suffering, including conflict, including separation. The same lessons learned and forgotten, and learned again. The same mistakes made in each iteration. The same prices paid over and over. Arceus dividing itself. Giratina accepting exile. Life feeding on life. Loneliness and mortality. And distance and loss, all of it recurring. The wheel turns whether we want it to or not. And turning means returning to what came before. The comfort of cycles is also their curse. Nothing is resolved. Nothing is truly learned. The pattern simply continues. The ancient texts acknowledge this with quiet resignation, as if the writers recognized that existence itself might be a trap. not malicious, but inescapable. Consciousness, once awakened, cannot choose unconsciousness without ceasing to be itself. Life, once begun, cannot stop without dying. The cycle, once started, cannot end without unmaking everything. So it has continued, will continue. And we humans and Pokémon both exist within this great cycle, fragments of Arceus experiencing itself through countless forms, each life a brief spark in the turning wheel, each consciousness a small mirror reflecting the original awareness that emerged from void. Every bond between trainer and partner echoes the original unity that had to break to become creation. Every journey mirrors the cosmic story in miniature, beginning in innocence, encountering conflict, learning hard lessons, growing through struggle, and eventually returning changed to where you started. You are the universe experiencing itself. That's not metaphor, that's the literal truth the creation myth reveals. You are a fragment of Arceus, animated by the late Guardian's gift of consciousness, shaped by time and space, alive through Mew's descent, protected and threatened by legendary forces, existing in a reality written by living letters. And the loneliness you sometimes feel, that homesickness for a place you've never been, that longing for unity you can't quite name, that's the memory of what you were before you became separate, the echo of primordial wholeness, the ghost of the void that dreams, but you cannot return to it. Not while remaining yourself, not while consciousness persists. The price of being aware is being separate. The cost of experience is existing outside what you're experiencing. This is the tragedy at the heart of creation, and also its beauty. Because separation allows for connection, distance makes journeys possible, endings give weight to moments. Mortality makes choices matter. The imperfections, the flaws, the prices and shadows, they're what make existence meaningful, instead of merely being. The texts don't offer comfort about this. They simply present it, as if to say, this is what is. Not good or bad, not fair or unfair, just the structure of reality, built from division, maintained through sacrifice, cycling endlessly through patterns too vast to escape. But they do suggest one thing, one small grace in the turning wheel. That meaning isn't found in escaping the cycle, it's found in how you move through it. The connections you form despite distance, the moments of beauty you create despite impermanence, the kindness you choose despite suffering. You are a fragment of the divine. You carry within you the essence of something vast and original. And the fact that you're small, temporary, destined to end and perhaps begin again, that doesn't diminish what you are, it defines it. The universe needed to shatter for you to exist. Arceus divided itself so you could be. Time flows forward carrying you toward death, so your life can have shape and meaning. Space separates you from others, so connection can feel like grace instead of inevitability. Everything that seems like limitation is actually the condition of possibility. Everything that feels like loss is the price of having had something worth losing. And the cycle continues. Arceus perhaps stirring toward another sleep, another waking, the cosmic egg preparing to appear again in some future void. The same story ready to unfold in new variations, with new details, but the same essential pattern, creation as eternal return. The wheel turning through darkness and light, unity becoming multiplicity, becoming unity again, forever, without end. You don't have to stay awake for all of this. You don't have to hold every detail. Let it wash over you. Let it settle into the background of your mind while consciousness dims and sleep approaches. The creation myth doesn't need you to remember it perfectly. It's already written into your existence. You are part of it, living it, cycling through it in your own small way. So rest now, knowing you're part of something ancient and ongoing. A fragment of a story that began before beginning was possible and continues through every ending. The void still dreams beneath everything. The original one still creates from itself. The lake guardians maintain consciousness. Time flows and space expands, and antimatter balances matter in its reverse dimension. Muse children fill the world with life. Legendary forces keep the elements in check. The unknown write reality in living letters, and you exist within all of this, temporary and eternal, separate and connected, a small part of an infinite whole that divided itself so existence could experience what it means to be. The wheel turns, the cycle continues. The story never quite ends because every ending is a beginning in disguise. And in the space between waking and sleep, between thought and dream, between being and unbeing, the mystery remains. The question that predates Arceus itself: was the original one truly first? Or did it too emerge from something beyond? Something older, something that cycles on scales even creation myths can't capture. The texts don't answer. They simply fall silent, as if to say, some mysteries must remain mysteries. Some questions have no answers, only deeper questions. Some truths exist beyond what words, even living letters, can write. So let it be. Let the uncertainty hold you gently. Let the cycle turn in the background while you drift. You are a fragment of eternity, having a temporary experience. You are the universe dreaming itself awake. You are part of a story that never ends because it's always beginning again. Rest now. The creation will continue without your attention. And when you wake, you'll still be part of it, still carrying that spark of the divine, still moving through the eternal return. The void that dreams is patient. It's been waiting since before time existed. It can wait while you sleep. Let go. Drift. The wheel turns whether you watch it or not. And somewhere in dimensions beyond counting, in times that haven't happened yet and have always been happening, Arceus stirs. The cosmic egg forms in primordial darkness. The cycle prepares to begin again. But that's a story for another night. For now, this one is complete. But knowing this story, understanding these cosmic forces, doesn't mean humanity has learned to leave them alone. The creation myth isn't just ancient history. It's a blueprint, a map to powers that still exist, still sleep, still wait beneath sacred mountains, and at the bottom of 3 lakes. And throughout history, there have been those who looked at this story and saw not wonder but opportunity, not reverence but ambition. Those who learned the names Dialga, Palkia, Giratina, and thought, if reality was written once, perhaps it can be rewritten. The cycle continues in ways the ancient text never anticipated. Because humanity, given knowledge of how the universe was made, inevitably asks, could we unmake it? Could we start over? Could we reach back to that moment before time and space, before separation and suffering, and choose differently? This isn't theoretical. This isn't myth anymore. In modern Sinnoh, someone tried. Someone who understood the creation story perhaps too well, who saw the lake guardians not as sacred beings but as components to be harvested, who viewed Dialga and Palkia not as cosmic forces to revere, but as tools to be controlled. His name was Cyrus. And at a place called Spear Pillar, where the dimensions grow thin, and the ancient powers sleep closest to the surface, he gathered the pieces, the red chain forged from the lake guardian's essence, the summoning that would drag Dialga and Palkia from their dimensions, the plan to unmake reality and build something new from its ashes. He nearly succeeded. If you want to know what happened when someone actually tried to rewrite reality itself, when the cosmic forces we've been exploring were dragged into the present day, that story is waiting for you. The Sinnoh War, Spear Pillar, the moment when ancient myth collided with modern ambition. But for now, let these truths settle. Let the cosmic patterns fade into dreams,